Thank you very much. I'll just start with maybe a little bit of an anecdote. I see when I was a student at university, so one of my excellent alumni was Douglas Adams, who, if you don't know, wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he was telling us a little story at the start of his little speech, and it was about him and a group of students when they were first at university. And they had this lecturer who was absolutely renowned for storming up and down the lecture theatre at mad break rates. And they sort of had him like on the first row, and whenever he got to the left-hand side of the lecture theatre, they were all upbeat, they were all really looking at him, they were really interested in what he had to say. And when he got to the right-hand side of the lecture theatre, they all had their heads down, one of them was snoring, they were just showing no interest whatsoever. And apparently at the end of their 12-week stats course, they'd managed to pin the stats lecturer at the right-hand side of the lecture, and he hadn't moved at all. So why the hell am I mentioning Douglas Adams? Why the hell am I mentioning that anecdote? I first came in this room and I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. I can storm down this alleyway here, I can come around the back, I can really interact with the audience, I can really get in amongst you, sort of ruffle some feathers and really get a little bit of interaction going. Unfortunately, there's this camera up here, and I'm also being televised for the webinar, and apparently I can't go further than this. And if I get too close to Jazz, apparently that's a no-no too. So, just like to start off by saying you guys are very lucky. I was about to run down the aisles, but it's all been a bit too prescribed. The other thing you get bear in mind is why the hell I had to change the slides before I came in. I had lots of pictures. My first picture is a dog at a laptop wearing spectacles. And when we transferred those slides across the last time around, we lost that. So I thought that you guys needed to see my dog with spectacles, so I thought we'd go with the old slides. So, contents today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about old dogs, new tricks. I'm going to give a bit of background for group risk and data analytics. I recognise a few familiar faces here, but I think the majority of you is probably not from the group risk space. I'm going to answer the question, what do doctors and actuaries have in common? I'm going to go through a case study, which I found very interesting, which was a case study between a small pricing team working with a small group of data scientists, and how we collaborated together, and I found that experience to be really, really fantastic. So I thought I'd share that with you. It's pretty much central to what today is about. But as well as that, the team I head at the moment is about 20 odd of us, and we're looking to basically move out of the dark ages and move into new pricing systems. So giving some of the insights of that process, but more from a people point of view rather than necessarily from a systems point of view. So old dogs, new tricks. So I'm the old dog, and I guess data analytics is the new tricks. There's a couple of insights here. First of all, if you're of the sort of age that knows that the Ben Clinton photograph, the fashion in the 1990s for men, and also the 1993 Philadelphia, you'll be able to guess that I started my actuarial career in 1993. So I'm definitely an old dog. Why the hell do I mention this? Well, for those of you who were around at that time, I would absolutely encourage you to embrace data analytics. I found it a fascinating journey, especially over the last 12 months. Couldn't be more of a keen advocate. And the second one, though, is that for the younger generation, is that when you present some of the ideas, particularly in fields where data analytics is emerging rather than having been established, you're going to have to unfortunately communicate to people like myself, and understanding how to communicate to old dogs with your new tricks is also important. So just a little bit of a background here on group risk and data analytics. The greyed out background picture is from West Wing, which again is a 1990s series, and the little caption in the background there is, let us forget the fact you're coming a little late to the party and embrace the fact that you showed up at all. So thank you, Rob Lowe. So what do I mean by that? Well, group risk, I guess, is a little bit embarrassed to say, is probably at the latest adoption stage of the data analytic journey. There's probably a few good reasons for that. So the first one is that the dynamics of the group risk market are very different to individual retail, but also massively different to individual GI. So if I came up with an insight that one class of people, people who park their cars in the garage are a lot safer than people who parked out in the street, that'd be absolutely fabulously important for general insurance, and probably 30 years too late, but that would be massively important. But from a group point of view, it doesn't work that way. So, most of my clients are quite happy charging the same price for males and females, even though the cost of that might slightly vary. And if we win a mandate, we win 500,000 members, or we don't win any at all, and it doesn't matter about those cross subsidies. So the commercial imperative around granularity hasn't really existed in the recent past in group risk. The other amount is the data we've got has pretty been shoddy. The data has been pretty rubbish. It's very tall. There's hardly that many rating factors involved, and we've sort of historically priced off premium data. And also the number of claims aren't anywhere near as much as the number of people who pranged their car in the last year. So when it comes to doing some sort of granularity assessments, when you start subsetting the data down, you start to get some really sparse data issues pretty quickly. However, on the advocacy for change, now there's an awful lot more focus on member cross-subsidisation. There's been some massive legislative change in the market, in the group risk market, and mix is going to change quite dramatically, particularly by factors such as age. And also, it's a little bit too late to be complacent now. You can't stick with your old models because all your competitors are moving in that direction, and it's just a question of how long it's going to take before the market moves and embraces. So we might be 20 years behind our general insurance colleagues in some of the models we do, but I think the experience of my journey in the last 12 months is particularly useful in terms of the people aspect of it, and also particularly interested in terms of communicating in fields where perhaps the senior management or the really key decision makers haven't been exposed to the sort of data analytics that might be the case in the general insurance market. So I said before I'd start with a case study that I found really useful, and just to show for me the power of data analytics. It was probably my road to Damascus conversion moment. The question is, what do doctors and actuaries have in common? And the answer is basically survival analysis. So survival analysis is used extensively in clinical trials. And the other thing around survival analysis is that with the survival module and all the other packages out there in R, there's an awful lot of literature, models and stuff based in that. Now, there's lots of papers, presentations around the use of termination analysis, which is a classic actuarial problem transferred into survival analysis, but perhaps less so in relation to IBNR estimation, which are probably even more important in the group risk context. So one of the things I started to do when I started here was that, taking the classic termination analysis, we were able to put it through some of the survival analysis, convert it to a survival analysis problem, and we were able to do it in a very short period of time, something that used to take us weeks of coding, and we were able to do it in a matter of a few hours. So that was massively encouraging. But also we were able to leverage off all the diagnostic tools, all of the abilities there. So, the key for me was really finding a quite obscure actuarial problem and then working out what the equivalent problem was in R or in some other discipline. And if you can find something in medical studies, you're absolutely sweet, because basically there's thousands and thousands of publications in that area. So the insight for us was basically converting the question in group risk: would a person who is in this particular age bracket more likely to notify earlier or later, was exactly the same mathematically, because the question was somebody in this drug A more likely to survive than somebody who's using drug B. But as I said before, I think the use of termination analysis in group risks and the use of survival techniques is probably well known. But I thought that one of the insights we had, and one of the things that we really enjoyed as part of this process, was just expanding the scope of that a little bit further. So on the left-hand side, there's some sort of termination analysis, which is a classic survival thing. So how long do people live? How long it is before an income protection claim would someone cease their claim? But probably the most important assumption in group risk pricing is how long is it before some claim event happens before someone notifies you. The tails in group risk are very long. They can typically be sort of 3 or 4 years, and probably the most important assumption we make in pricing is that. So I think we had a moment as a team where we suddenly realized that if you turn the graph on the left-hand side upside down, you end up with the graph on the right-hand side. So it was pretty easy to convert the two, and then we were able to do both termination analysis and IBNR analysis in our ability on both. So I guess the advantage of that, and it comes back to one of my themes, which is essentially When you can communicate or you're doing something new, and in group risk, doing anything in data analytics is probably going to fall into that category. It's really important that you take people on the journey. And I'd like to reiterate some of the comments around model complexity. We had lots and lots of really complicated models. But the ones that were best were the ones that we could start with something we knew and get there. So what we managed to do here is that group risk for 20 years has essentially used the chain ladder, or at least some variants of that, as some of the keys to looking at how we sort of work out the question of how long are the notification delays. And what we found is that by converting the problem from a traditional group risk practitioner approach to a survival analysis problem, and it's not a true survival analysis problem, it's more fudging it, we're able to build quite complicated models, or a lot more complicated than we used to, but in a way that we were able to show step-by-step attribution of that to people and able to communicate it quite clearly. So I guess the key finding from our project was that if you do that, the standard chain ladder model that we've always used for 20 years actually gives you an absolutely identical result if you use the Kepler-Meyer approach from a survival analysis, if you formulate the problem in the same way. And I guess from that point of view, it's all plain sailing from there, because we were able to then show that the Cox proportional hazard model without any covariates was essentially the same thing, and then we were able to add in that covariate structure and then much more complicated models. In some ways it's a little bit over the top, because you could have got the similar sort of results through a GLM, but I think the important point here is not, I'm not teaching you what model to use, but the important point here was that we were able to sort of essentially explain each of the steps, and it was the communication that was mostly important. So it's one of the key points of my experiences last year was really about that management communication. So we were communicating to the board, we were communicating new concepts, new ideas, and the idea was that if we couldn't explain it to the board, or I couldn't explain it in sort of common sense language, I was going to lose them, and if I sort of used the words random forest, I think I probably would have got shoved out of the boardroom. So the answer was trying to get to sort of these sort of complicated things, but without necessarily scaring them along the way. So the moral of the story was really start with what they know and what they're familiar with. Move in baby steps. Keep the size of those steps as simple as possible, and always bear in mind the so what challenge, the relevance challenge. So again, coming back to the complexity, it was absolute delight to work with data scientists and data analytics, but the one thing we had was the desire for some of our data analytics friends to charge off in the most complex models possible, and we found that if you did that, it didn't necessarily give us massively different results. So a friend of mine, Rene, was always coming up with a slightly more complicated model, and I think his view was that if you come up with a slightly more complicated model, it had to be better than the more simpler one. I'm a KISS principal advocate myself, so I had the opposite view, but the conflict was good fun. But we found out in the data, the group space, that sometimes adding this complexity made massive commercial differences. In some cases it made really huge differences. In some cases it made absolutely diddly squat. So it was really about working out which of these models were important. So I'm going to give you an example in group risk. We found that, you know, where people lived was really important, but where people lived hardly changed much for, you know, a huge fund over the next 5 years. So actually it wasn't really that much predictive power, although it was really important in terms of the individual granularity. So management communication, really about sort of making sure you're keeping it relevant, and you could explain in nice simple terms exactly why you got there, and we found that the model formulation we chose that was really good was one that enabled that attribution analysis. So the other part, I guess, is just keeping it to going back to the sort of topic and directly making it relevant, is the idea of model development. So we had, I guess, the pilot in question was very successful, and we all got very enthusiastic about data analytics. But the challenge for me was that the head of pricing was taking the stuff that we were doing for that one particular case and then sort of leveraging it across the whole team. So at TAL, in the group of space, we've got about 25 or 6 people in the pricing team. I wanted to move it from just something we've done once to something that we do sort of every day. And I found that, you know, that was actually a far bigger challenge than the challenge of coming up with a commercially successful model in the project space. So from a process improvement point of view, there was absolutely massive benefits for moving into the data analytics side of things. So group risk is sort of bit in the 18th century. We're still using Excel spreadsheets and all that stuff to do the stuff we work. We moved to sort of a SQL as a basic database form, and then we had sort of R modules on the top, and we did all the analysis there and fed it back into SQL, and then we had the R visualizations. But trying to take that from what we did every day and get that across was quite difficult. But the benefits were there. So what used to take 1 or maybe 2 weeks to do, we could do in a day or so when we got the model thing. In fact, we could do it like in some of the things in like a couple of hours. And I think once people started to see that, you know, stuff that was boring and mundane that they could do in just a short period of time, and you know, what's that Bank West advert about less BS, by which I mean less boring stuff. You know, that was quite appealing to people. So. It was also quite appealing to me as a manager of a large team to get, you know, 5, 6, 10 times process efficiency. So that was huge. The other one was that it was about the consistent control framework. So we've now got an ability to have models across the whole of our portfolio, and rather than having individual models for each individual fund, we can now sort of have, when the end of this comes through, we can have a portfolio approach. So rather than looking at, like, you know, just in individual transactions and just looking at the governance from that point of view, I can now look at portfolio management rather than just sort of piecemeal. And that for me was absolutely huge. And the other thing, I guess, though, is just be careful, is the black box. So, and this comes back to what people are familiar with. So at least the advantage of spreadsheets was people would be familiar with it, they could peer review it, they sort of knew what they were looking for. The one thing that we found very easy in R was it's very easy to change a hyperparameter here or do some slight difference here, and then suddenly you get this massively different result and you don't really understand why. So, or that we were doing some more complicated multi-state sort of survivor analysis later on in the process, and we had this problem, and we'd misspell years with a slight case-sensitive number on the Y, and we couldn't find it in the code, and because it wasn't explicitly declared, it made a big difference, and that took us a couple of days of stressful late nights. So it was very, very easy to make a very small mistake that had a very large impact. So one of the things that we're addressing as part of our project and our change processes is just really making sure that we understand all the controls, the control frame around that, and avoiding the black box. And I think the biggest thing that we had in terms of success that for senior management, and the thing that kept me asleep at night, sleeping like a baby, was the ability to replicate essentially the same models we used to have with our starting position and then move into small attribution steps. So really then what we've got here is a big project. It's basically to change the way that we price across the team. We had, in some ways, it's a big IT project. We're changing the systems, the IT architecture we're using. We're changing the way we look at things. We've got different models. We've got a portfolio approach. And there's a lot there that we need to do, and we're most of the way through it. But I found that actually it wasn't an IT project at all. It was actually a people project. And the people aspect of it were far more important in terms of embedding that pricing than the systems part of it. And the reason for that, I guess, is that people are far more important than technology, and that there was a lot of, I went around and I imagined that each people in my team had like a little angel and a little devil on their shoulders, which is the reason why you got those little graphics here. And that the angels were encouraging them to take the righteous path along the data analytics, and the devil on their right shoulder was like, don't worry, just stick with the old spreadsheets. So in terms of the angel, my view and my marketing pitch was that, you know, you've got a lot more interesting stuff, lots more opportunity to use new skills, less boring stuff. Quicker process. You can get something done in an hour that used to take you a week, and you can go home earlier and spend a bit more life, and there's more to life than being in the office. And that resonated quite strongly. And well, for the analysts, it's a work-study balance rather than a work-life balance. But yeah. And the other thing was just the collaboration and the development. So finding that as we went through this project, people were collaborating a lot more. People were working less in silos. People were borrowing ideas from everybody else. We've now got this library. We've got this collaboration group, and the dynamic there was fantastic. And the other thing I found to do is that, particularly with people in their 20s, is just make it slightly competitive. And so you just like, you know, somebody who's doing slightly well or gets something can get a little bit of kudos over their peers, and well, that was it really. So if you make it slightly competitive, make it a little bit of game, you're sweet. In terms of the devils, though, the roadblock was, I like the idea, but I'm just too busy. You know, I've got this deadline tomorrow, I can do it. And what you're asking me to do is, you know, is one step back, 2 steps forward, but I just can't afford to take that 1 step back. Look, I get it. I completely understand that. But if you never take that 1 step back, you'll always be standing still. So the other sort of little thing from a human point of view was my previous skill set was valued. I don't want to be a beginner again. And I can understand that again. As somebody who started the actuarial career in 1903, I can absolutely understand that. It's basically saying that, you know, what I'm doing here is, I understand that, and I'm going to be now a beginner again. So that was a big sort of prohibition. And then the other one is it's a big black box. It's just too easy to make a mistake. But I think we found that at the end of the day, I went and walked around the office this morning, and about 6 months ago, everyone still had spreadsheets open, and I think it was quite a good day this morning. I probably had most of the people having R open and the SQL databases, and I felt that was pretty much a good testament to the change process. So just to sort of summarize, old dogs, new tricks. If you're an old dog like me, I would absolutely encourage you to learn new tricks. If you're not an old dog, just learn how to communicate with us. I found that through this process that communication was more important than actually getting the model fit precisely right. If you can't communicate it, certainly at a board level, then in my sort of practice area, then you really weren't going to get too far with a more complicated model that nobody understood. Processes, models, they're all very important, but at the end of the day, actuarial science is a people business, and you need to manage the people and get them to embrace the change, and that's more important. But the benefits are out there. We can achieve massive processes efficiencies and also understand what's going on tremendously more. So I think I'm almost out of time, but thank you very much. And I won't run down the corridors, but thank you very much.